Good morning. Today our group would like to present the information about the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower is an iron lattice tower named after the engineer Gustave Eiffel, whose company designed and built the tower. The Eiffel Tower was the winning entry in a competition for a centerpiece of the Paris Exposition in 1889. The design was selected from over 300 entries for its striking design and for its economical structure, which display the French prowess in metal construction. First of all, allow me to introduce our group members and the task they will talk about. The first presenter, Esther, will tell you about the history of French. The next presenter, Ying, will talk about the history of the Eiffel Tower. After that, I will present the ornamentation about the building. While the next part, the material used in build the building, will tell by Jessie. While the last part, Huey will tell you about the structure and layout of the building. Without wasting our time, the story about the Eiffel Tower will start by the first presenter.
Hello, and I would like to talk about the history of France. France is the only European country facing both the North Sea and the Mediterranean, and it has been subject to a particularly rich variety of cultural influences. Though France is famous for the rudeness of its peasant population, it has also been a European melting pot, even before the arrival of the Celtic Gauls in the centuries before Christ, to the Mediterranean immigrations of the 20th century. Roman conquest by Julius Caesar had an enduring impact. From the 4th and 5th centuries AD, which is Anno Domini, meaning for the year of our Lord in Latin, waves of barbarian invaders destroyed much of the Roman legacy. The Germanic Franks provided political leadership in the following centuries, but when their line died out in the late 10th century, France was socially and politically fragmented. The Capetan dynasty gradually pieces France together over the Middle Ages, a period of great economic prosperity and cultural vitality. The 100 Years' War took place from the year 1337 to 1453. England was competing against France for the control of the French land. The frequent famines and ravages of the bubonic plague awoken the Black Death in 1348. The Black Death, which is the plague of 1348 to 1352, caused 4 to 5 million deaths, which makes up about 25% of the French population. People put their faith in prayers and holy processions for the want of medicines. Both historical incidents brought setbacks, and the dynasty's power was seriously threatened by the rival Burgundian dukes. France recovered, and despite the wars of religion, flourished during the Renaissance, followed by the grandeur of Louis XIV's reign. He is also known as the Sun King, and he became king in 1638 at the tender age of 4, to his death in the year 1715 at the age of 76, making him the longest ruling monarch in the history of Europe. His reign marked the peak of absolute monarchy in France, and he is famous for asserting the quote, "I am the state." Their essays were read across Europe and even in American colonies. Although France exported worldly items as well as ideas, the state's increasing debts brought social turmoil, triggering the 1789 revolution. Under the motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, the new republic and its reforms had a far-reaching impact on the rest of Europe. The revolution of 1789 ended the absolute monarchy and introduced major social and institutional reforms, many of which were endorsed and consolidated by Napoleon. Yet, the revolution also inaugurated the instability that remained a hallmark of French politics until de Gaulle and the Fifth Republic. Since the year 1789, France has known 5 republics, 2 empires, and 3 brands of royal power, plus the Vichy government in World War II. Modernization in the 19th and 20th centuries proved a slow process. Railways, the military service, and radical educational reforms were crucial in forming a sense of French identity among the citizens. Rivalry with Germany dominated French politics for most of the late 19th and early 20th century. The population losses in World War I were traumatic for France, while during the year 1940 to 1944, the country was occupied by Germany. Yet, since 1945, the two countries have proved the backbone of the developing European Union. After the 1950s, the traditional foundations of French society changed, in which the number of peasant farmers plummeted, old industries decayed, but jobs in service sectors and high-technology industries grew dramatically. With this, the French came to enjoy the benefits of mass culture and the widespread consumerism. High-prestige projects such as Concorde, TGV, La Défense, and the Pompidou Center brought international acclaim.
Hi everyone, my name is Ying. Today, I would like to talk about the history of Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower is one of the most famous icons in the world. It is the pride of France and has contributed significantly to the French tourism. It is hard to believe now, but when Eiffel Tower was proposed in the late 18th, a lot of Parisians and French citizens opposed it. On 2nd of May 1886, the French government announced a design contest. French engineers and architects were invited to study the possibility of erecting on a Champ de Mars an iron tower with a base of 125 meters squares and 300 meters high. Whatever the contestants decided to propose, their design had to meet 2 other criteria. Firstly, the structure had to be self-financing. It had to attract enough ticket-buying visitors to the exposition to pay for its own construction. Secondly, it had to be a temporary structure that could be torn down easily at the end of the exposition. More than 100 proposals were submitted by the deadline. Most were fairly conventional, but some were downright weird. But the truth was, none of them had a chance. By the time the contest was announced, Alexander Gustave Eiffel, a 53-year-old structural engineer, had a job soon up. Weeks earlier, he had met with the French minister Edmond Lacroix and presented plans for a rough iron tower he was ready to build. Eiffel had already commissioned 5,329 mechanical drawings representing the 18,038 different components that would be used. Lacroix was so impressed that he rigged the contest so only Eiffel would win the contest. In January 1887, Eiffel signed a contract with the French government and the city of Paris. Eiffel and Company, his engineering firm, agreed to contribute 1.3 million euro of the tower's estimated 1.6 million euros construction cost. In exchange, Eiffel would receive all revenues generated by the tower during the exposition. 20 years later, full ownership reverted to the city of Paris. Construction began on 26th of January with not a moment to spare. With valid 2 years left to build the tower in time for the opening of the exposition, Eiffel would have to build the tower more quickly than any similar structure had been built before. The Washington Monument, just over half of the size of Eiffel Tower, taken 36 years to complete. When digging started on the foundation, more than 300 prominent Parisians signed a petition protesting the tower. They claimed Eiffel hollow-handed would disfigure and dishonor the city. But Eiffel and the city ignored the petition and the work continued uninterrupted. When the tower progressed unabated, however, a sense of awe replaced the fear. To accomplish his task, Eiffel devised some incredible ingenious techniques. Unlike other massive engineering projects of the day, he had nearly all the parts needed in the tower prefabricated off-site in his workshops. This meant that when they arrived at the tower, the parts could quickly be riveted into place with minimum of fuss. The rivets holes themselves were pre-drilled in the tolerance of 1/10 of 1 mm, making it possible for the 20 riveting teams to drive an average of 1,650 rivets a day. None of the greatest use is permitted to weigh more than 3 tons. This made it possible to use smaller cranes to lift everything into place. Finally, the tower was erected in 1889. The tower was almost demolished in 1909 but was spared because of its antenna could be used for military purposes. During World War I, it played an important role in capturing the infamous Mata Hari. It gained such importance to the French people that there were no more thoughts of demolishing it. But by 1980, thanks to the mismanagement, the tower had fallen into serious disrepair. The structure weighed 9,700 had gained an extra of 1,300 tons over the year from concrete additions and radio and television antennas. The elevators were worn out and the entire structure was considered dangerous. A new company was designated by the city to look after the tower, and renovations costing 38 million took place between 1980 and 1983. The extra weight was sawed off and most recognizable pieces like the staircase were publicly auctioned. New elevators was installed and the structure itself was spruced up with a coat of fresh paint weighed 5 tons. Today, the Eiffel Tower is a successful business affair. Last year, more than 4.5 million people visited it, a figure that had increased by millions since 1980. And the structure is once again financed almost solely by admission receipts.
Good morning, I'm Jacqueline. Today I will present about the ornamentation found in Eiffel Tower. As you can see, most of the buildings found in France were full with ornaments such as scarf, statue, and other decorations. Well, unlike the other buildings, the Eiffel Tower was not very decorated, and just only the light bulbs. There are a staggering 10,000 light bulbs lighting the tower at night, and more than 350 spotlights illuminate the latticework. While on the top of the tower is a rotating light that can be seen up to 80 kilometers away. Well, if you don't actually visit the tower at night, you can find it easily from everywhere you are in the city as the skies grow dark. If that weren't enough, the first 10 minutes of every hour, the tower will spark with a light show. It will look like millions of tiny diamonds dancing all over it. Impossible to truly capture in a photographer. It must be experienced by your own eyes. And now, let us review the history of the ornamentation of the Eiffel Tower. In 1937, for the International Arts and Techniques, Andrew Granite added colored lighting to the tower. There are 252 yellow-orange sodium tinted lamps were installed in 1935. During 1986, the lighting system was installed to provide both normal and sparkle lighting. The new system consists of some 20,000 special light bulbs covering the whole of the tower. That's 5,000 per size with a weight of a total of 8 tons. The system has 230 enclosed lighting fixtures and electrical boxes, networking 800 strings of measuring 18 kilometers long. The new lighting installation required 25 mountain climbers who worked for 5 months to set up this new system. For 5 days, commencing January 24th of 2004, the towers will light up all night in scarlet to celebrate the Chinese New Year. The tower consumes 7.5 million kilowatts of electricity per year. And now, let us watching the interesting fireworks video of the Eiffel Tower.
Eiffel Tower weighs 7,300 tons, while the entire structure, including non-metal components, is approximately 10,000 tons. Eiffel Tower made of powder iron and cast iron, which both are wrought iron. Eiffel chose iron because steel was more expensive since it was a new development, and also because he was experienced and confident in iron design. Cutting was an industrial revolution means of making irons and steel. Other side, cast iron, which is maintained with a protective layer of paint, can last an extremely long time. The tower has been painted once every 7 years. Maintenance on the tower includes applying 50 metric tons of 3 graded tons of paint every 7 years to protect the 200,000 square meters of iron lattice work from rust. The darkest paint is used at the bottom and the lighter shade at the top. Each repainting by 25 painters working for 15 months requires 1,050 brushes, 5,000 sanding discs, and 1,050 sets of work clothes. On occasion, the color of the paint is changed. The tower is colorfully painted to a shade of brown, and paint guns are not allowed. Must be applied only manually with brushes and rolls. Glass is used on the first floor of the tower, though it was not the first process to produce bar iron without charcoal. Pudding was by far the most successful and replaced the earlier potting and stamping process, as well as the much older charcoal finery process. This enabled a great expansion of iron produced in Great Britain to take place. The expansion constitutes the Industrial Revolution so far as the iron industry is concerned. Most 19th century application of wrought iron, including the Eiffel Tower and the original framework of the Statue of Liberty, used powdered iron. Application, the color of their paint is changed and the lower is colorfully painted a shade bronze. Commonly used material are asphalt, concrete, steel, fiber, unbound and chemically bound aggregators, and chemically treated soils. Citizens of Paris fear that a structure made of pure iron would negatively overshadow other outstanding structures in the city. The overuse of iron gives the Eiffel Tower its renewed beauty.
The tower is a rather complex structure in detail, especially in its geometry, and to some extent in its loading. Therefore, the analysis will mix both its geometry and loading. After a discussion of the geometry and loading, the support reaction, the internal forces, and the internal stresses are all computed. To complete the analysis, both the safety and the efficiency of the design are evaluated. We designed the tower to be 300 meters high, which is 984 feet, approximately 90 stories. It is 328 feet wide at its base. There are 4 observation decks. For analysis, the tower will be divided into 3 parts. The width of the tower corresponding to each of these heights have been calculated from the equation for a parabola, which is an idealization of the tower's shape. Its true shape is somewhat more sharply curved than a parabola. The basic structure of the tower is lattice wrought columns at each of the 4 corners of the tower, in which diagonal connect 4 elements, thus making stiff but lightweight columns. Typical section illustrating these columns can be seen next to their position along the tower in the large diagram above. Such composite structural elements require detailed calculation in analysis, so the composition columns are idealized by single solid cross-section columns, each with an area of 800 square inches. These 4 elements are assumed to rise along the curve of the actual columns of the tower and meet near the top. This idealization, however, is still three-dimensional and must be further simplified to two-dimensional for this simple analysis. This is accomplished by essentially combining the two front and the two back columns into two of double thickness. This results in an area of 1,600 square inches for each of the simplified support. One should realize that in this simplification, the curve of the columns is altered. In the three-dimensional structure, the curve is toward the center of the square base. But in the two-dimensional simplification, the curve is in the plane of the model and therefore decreased somewhat. This change is slight. However, in light of the idealization of the tower's form, the analysis will assume that the curved elements follow a parabola, but actually they curve more sharply than this, as illustrated in the following diagram. This more curved shape was selected because it was the most efficient in resisting the wind load, which is really not uniform, as it is presently assumed to be. One further point must be made about the geometry of the model. The overall structure has a vertical axis between the two columns, but individually, each column has its own axis that follows the curve of the elements. These axes are idealized as parabolas. Overall internal forces are found from an analysis centered on the tower axis. Internal forces in the individual element, which act on the curved element axis, are found from the overall forces. When the tower axis is used, the connection between the columns will be idealized as continuous. They are actually continuous above the second platform, but below this point, they are made only by the lower platform on the ground.
Well, that's all about the story of the Eiffel Tower. We hope that the information we present will make you all more recognize the history and the details of the Eiffel Tower. Thanks for watching.